Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, an overview of the Pennsylvania Climate Leadership Academy. I'm Matt Reese, Green Gov Council Assistant Director, and today's webinar is co-hosted and supported through our partnership with the Penn State Sustainability Institute. The Green Gov Council was established by the Governor's Executive Order 2019-01, which requires Commonwealth agencies to lead by example, promoting energy conservation and sustainable governance. The executive order sets forth the Commonwealth's goals for the Commonwealth, including the goal of achieving a 26% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2025 and an 80% reduction by 2050. The executive order created specific goals for agencies on fleet electrification, high performance buildings, annual energy reductions, and use of renewable electricity. You can visit our website at www.dgs.pa.gov/greengov to see how agencies are meeting these goals. You will find a host of information on the website, including completed agency certification checklists for the past 3 years, past annual reports, along with a new annual report to be released this February or towards the end of February, and GreenGov news and sign-up opportunities such as the quarterly newsletter and future webinar series such as today's. Now I'd like to introduce our friend, colleague, and partner at the Penn State Sustainability Institute, Peter Boger, PhD. Peter Boger is the Assistant Director for Community Engagement at Penn State's University Sustainability Institute and is responsible for developing strategic programming and partnerships such as this one with the Green Gov Council that help Penn State leverage its resources to promote sustainability throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Thank you so much, Matt, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Just want to do a quick shout out from the Sustainability Institute. We serve Penn State University as a very similar mission to what the Green Gov Council does for the state government. We're not the owners of sustainability at Penn State. We're facilitators and networkers trying to bring people together to bring sustainability into Penn State's mission across teaching, research, community outreach and engagement, student engagement, and our operations. And we're really thrilled to be partnering on this series. This is our third go around on the series with the Green Gov Council, because we think the topics that we're talking about here are applicable to all the work that everybody here is doing and really can help empower people to think about how do we move forward. Coming off of COP26 this fall, where we saw just how far the globe is from actually achieving its greenhouse gas targets, and then just this week hearing that there was a 6.2% increase in US emissions over the last year, as opposed to the decrease of about 5% that we need every year in order to meet our targets. There is a lot to be done in the realm of climate change, and that's why we're thrilled to be hosting this series with so many great speakers talking about how we can advance our impacts on climate change and other sustainability challenges in Pennsylvania. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Matt and look forward to hearing from Dan today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks, Peter. We certainly appreciate that. And now I'll introduce our guest speaker for this afternoon, Dan Krieger. Dan is the Executive Director and co-founder of the Association of Climate Change Officers, ACO, and has a unique familiarity with climate change and sustainability initiatives being undertaken across public and private sectors. Dan has led ACO's programming efforts since 2008, as well as the establishment of its certification and training programs. In 2017, Dan co-founded the nation's first state-run climate change institution, the Maryland Climate Leadership Academy, and has been a partner in administering the Pennsylvania Climate Leadership Academy as well. Dan is a recognized expert on institutionalizing climate change into public and private sector decision-making and serves on the Dean's Advisory Board for the FIU College of Communication, Architecture, and Arts, and is a board member of the Global Electronics Council, which oversees the EPEAT program. Dan has also been a reviewer for the IPCC and numerous federal agency grant committees, and is a frequent lecturer at conferences and universities on climate change. And take it away, Dan.
Oh, wow, it's my turn. Welcome. Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks to Penn State University and to the Pennsylvania Green Gov Council for inviting me to join, and for all of you for joining me on a Friday afternoon in advance of what I hope will be a beautiful weekend for you guys up there in the Commonwealth. So as we have learned, apparently I'm technologically deficient So one of the Green Gov Council leaders, Matt or Mark, is going to be advancing the slides. I'll beg your indulgence if there's a slight delay as we move forward from slide to slide, because my computer apparently will not share on Microsoft Teams. So if we can move to the next slide. So let me start by giving you a little bit of background on ACO. In order for you to really have a meaningful understanding of what we're trying to do with the Academy, it's important to understand the context of what ACO is and does, because our worldview and our vision and our mission really kind of are an underlying foundation to what we're building in Pennsylvania. So next slide. So let's start with a little bit about who we are. We're a credentialing body and a professional standard setting organization. We administer training and education programs around the country and the world. We're a community of practice. We do an extensive amount of research and publication. As Matt indicated, we administer 2 statewide academies, and in fact, one of your other neighbors is going to be launching an academy in the next few weeks that we'll be administering. But for years and years, we've also done a number of contracted training activities for government and private sector agencies. One of those government agencies is actually the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, who contracted us to do a meaningful array of training and organizational assessment activities. Really, at the heart of what we're trying to do is define, develop, and support the functions, the resources, and the communities that are going to be necessary for organizational leadership in addressing climate-related risks and opportunities. Let me simplify that. Our worldview on climate change is not that climate change is an environmental challenge. We already know what the world's going to look like in 30, 50, and 70 years, depending upon what we choose to do over that time frame. We can model that out with a pretty good degree of certainty. We see this as a human capital challenge. Let me simplify. In any business context, in any operating context, and in any employer context, if you don't have the right people with the right skills in the right part of your organization, you can't succeed in anything. And in a changing planet, then we need to make sure that our systems, our government, our infrastructure, our businesses are equipped to have a workforce that can navigate the challenges of tomorrow, while also making sure that the challenges of tomorrow are not as significant as they potentially may be. Next slide. So who we are at our heart. Envision this graphic in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen here as an upside down T, maybe not as an arrow. We were established in 2008 to standardize and elevate the occupation of climate leadership. So when I say the occupation of climate leadership, first and foremost, occupations are defined by a set of common competencies that must be demonstrated in order to be considered part of that occupation. Right? So when you think about graduate programs in civil engineering or law or medical schools, these programs are fairly comparable as you go from one institution to the next, because they're forged upon and built upon getting students to a certain set of competencies. We saw a group of competencies needed to ask and answer the question, how does climate change affect my organization's operations, mission, marketplace, value chain, constituents, and what do we do in response? Which means we weren't asking the question, how do we reduce our footprint? We weren't asking the question, how do we deal with storm events? We were asking a broader question at a higher level, an existential risk management and strategic planning conversation. But very shortly after launching the organization, we found a major influx of numerous other occupations: civil engineers, architects, planners, energy management professionals, facilities managers, finance officers, just to name a few, all of whom have meaningful intersections with climate change, and frankly, whose professional societies had not done sufficient enough work to advance the integration of climate change into their occupations and their communities of practice. So as an organization, ACO is a mix of both. We operate at both the vertical and the horizontal in that diagram. So we have green space professionals who you may think of as being sustainability, resilience, climate change, corporate responsibility, and clean energy professionals. But we also have those supply chain professionals and planners and architects and energy managers and risk managers amongst our membership. And of course, occupations are not defined by sector, they're defined by competency. So our community of practice consists of all sectors across the board. Next slide. So as an organization, what we seek to do is help our members and our clients work on building culture and capacity, strengthen their governance, and advance their climate readiness. And we do this through a suite of different services. Foundationally are built upon, first and foremost, making sure that you have the right people with the right skills, the right literacy and knowledge, the right attitude in the right parts of organizations. Next slide. We are responsible for shaping a marketplace that perceives, appreciates, demands having people with those skills. So we also administer a postgraduate climate fellowship program, and I'm remiss in that I didn't add our most current fellowship, which is the Estee Lauder Companies, where our fellow who just completed her 1 year last week, or this week, I should say, just became a permanent employee of Estee Lauder. And so we help create an appreciation for having people with these skills and creating a track for those who want to be this in the future to be able to get their foot in the door in organizations. Next slide. So we recognize that a changing planet requires an unprecedented transformation in how we work, how we eat, how we play, how we design, how we build, how we fund, in everything that we do. And if that's the case, the example that I like to think of is, imagine a planet where gravity was going to change. If you believe that to be the case, and I'm not saying that climate change is going to change gravity, but in this hypothetical scenario, if you believed that gravity was going to change, you'd start to look and say, well, shoot, what does that affect? You might look up and down. You might look at the furniture sitting in front of you or that you're sitting on and say, well, shoot, it wasn't designed for that world. It wasn't designed for that gravity, and we'd have to redo everything. Well, when it comes to climate change, all of our systems, natural systems, built systems, human systems, are built upon the notion that weather at a time and place is going to fall within a set of parameters that we can anticipate. And when our systems are correct in those assumptions, then our systems can work pretty nicely. But when those events occur outside of the expected parameters, the specifications, if you will, that's where our systems begin to fail. So in order to have enterprises that have the capacity to deal with this change, we need to evaluate governance structure and leadership capabilities and culture, how stakeholders inside and outside the organization are impacted, and implications for the operations of those organizations. Somebody has their microphone unmuted. I don't know if you guys can address that. Next slide. So our case for this is, in this changing planet, we need to have those people involved in the initiatives that we're trying to spearhead that are either oriented towards reduction of emissions or preparedness or both, because they shouldn't be one or the other. We need to be leaner, we need to be adaptive, and we need to be resilient across the board. And it doesn't make sense to do one of those things and not the others. For example, putting a solar array in a floodplain may be net zero emissions. It's also likely going to be net zero watts, right? Alternatively, building stormwater drainage infrastructure that better handles intense precipitation events, but that also guzzles copious amounts of fossil fuel and continues to emit more emissions is wholly illogical. So one, we have to be system thinkers, but two, if we're going to take on these sorts of projects, which we haven't done before, think renewable energy projects, think about the different roles who have to play some part of getting that project off the ground, whether it's somebody in procurement, legal, finance, energy management, facilities management, risk management. That's a lot of different roles who've never worked on a renewable energy project before. What skills and knowledge do they need to have? The credit rating agencies recognize this. In fact, the credit rating agencies have already come out and said, look, we're going to start evaluating sovereign nations, governmental entities, and publicly traded companies in the context of their vulnerability to climate change, and vulnerability includes adaptive capacity. And our proof on this goes even further, where S&P issued a credit rating affirmation of Charles County, Maryland. They gave them a AAA rating and cited the county's participation, vibrant participation in the Maryland Climate Leadership Academy as evidence of very strong management, and gave them a AAA rating. Let me put into context why that matters. As the state treasurer said, Nancy Kopp, at a meeting involving the governor that was televised, the next time the county would go to pay for a school, taxpayer would pay less for that school simply because their credit rating had been affirmed at a AAA, and that a big part of that affirmation was sending their personnel to climate change training. But it's not just the ratings agencies. This is a national security and homeland security imperative. The defense and national security communities have cited climate change as a critical threat. In fact, a threat multiplier, and amongst the 6 or 7 top threats that we face as a nation for years, for more than a decade, that has been on the top 7. Just this week, Secretary Mayorkas, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, announced the Climate Change Professionals Program because they take it that seriously. We'll be administering the training for those personnel. Next slide. So at the end of the day, if we know that we need a climate smart workforce, we also have to ask the question, who needs to know what? Not everybody needs to have the same level of proficiency or knowledge. Not everybody needs to have focus in the same project or capability areas, but then we also need to have common understanding, common foundation, common drive. And so we have to address that in the context of what foundational knowledge and skills are needed in what places, what operational knowledge and experience needs to be applied in the context of climate change, and where do we need to have that more advanced strategic execution competencies. For those of you who understand labor pyramids and competency pyramids, this table actually should be a pyramid where the foundational knowledge and skills is the first level of the pyramid, the organizational knowledge would be the second, and the strategic execution competencies would be at the top. ACO's done an extensive amount of research over the years. You're absolutely welcome and encouraged to check out some of the findings on where the field of practice is, where its strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are. Next slide. So what we're looking at doing here is not answering the question that's oriented towards the polar bear. We're not interested in arguments that are simply for a purpose that does not align with the values of stakeholders. We have to figure out how to integrate competencies, knowledge, attitude, perception in the context of the things that people value. What do we know people value? Health, security, economic vitality. So we have to make sure that any curriculum, any learning progression is oriented towards coming back into that context. Next slide. So as an organization, we deploy training. We help organizations and or jurisdictions assess capacity and culture. We develop and deploy knowledge acceleration and or what we call interventions. And then we also do scenario planning and workshops and charrettes, and we help organizations think about how to build their internal and or external capacity. All right, so that's a little background on ACO. Let me pause before I jump into the vision for the Academy. Any questions? All right, let's move on to the next slide. So, as we mentioned earlier, about 5 years ago, I was asked to help the state of Maryland build the nation's first state-run climate change academy. We've been administering that since 2018. It took about a year to get it off the ground. And wouldn't you know that one of Pennsylvania's best and brightest, Heidi Kunsch, who's with the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, ventured down from Harrisburg down to Germantown, Maryland, where she participated in a CCP training program, became a certified climate change professional herself, and then went internally through the agency to advocate for building an academy in Pennsylvania. So let's talk about what that academy looks like and where we're going with it. Next slide. So we see tons of opportunities here to align climate action with public health and economic vitality, to help the state advance its preparedness and resilience. And it is already experiencing substantial impacts across the state, but to also enable it to scale up clean energy programs and consumption, to help develop goals and implementation strategies, better position practitioners and officials to engage the public on these dialogues that have been so challenging, but also to provide support to the communities and the alumni of these programs to help them with moving forward in their local implementation. But we also have this vision of making the whole greater than the sum of the parts. Large organizations will likely have specialized staff working on these considerations, and even that will not be enough. Small organizations are very unlikely to have specialized staff. So if we look at this in the context of jurisdictions and institutional boundaries, how far can we really go? Our systems are interdependent, they're intertwined, and Mother Nature could care less about jurisdictional boundaries. So can we find ways to share and aggregate community and staff resources to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts? These are all key attributes and opportunities of this vision. Next slide. So our vision for the Academy is to start with education and training that is oriented towards state and local government practitioners, infrastructure operators, business and community leaders, to do so using online and in-person formats. Hopefully in a COVID world, we'll be able to get back to actually doing these things in a room together at some point. In the meantime, at least do them online, and to be able to then to shape a marketplace that demands having people with these skills, so that employers are saying, we prefer to have somebody in this role. We expect to have somebody in this role be able to do X, and by supporting that through credentialing and recognition. In time, as we build a robust Academy alumni network, of which we have now several hundred who've already participated in Academy programs, to help that alumni network then by conducting research and analysis, by helping them contemplate new staffing resources like fellowship programs or shared staffing solutions, to build a community of practice in Pennsylvania that works together on these challenges and takes lessons learned from one another and innovates together. But also by curating resources and facilitating knowledge sharing. And then last part of this, the more advanced part of this, is to also create an opportunity for establishing a laboratory for solutions. We've envisioned and we've known from day one that as we get people smart and capable, they're going to start looking for tools and resources, and that a lot of this is uncharted territory. And so as we get into those uncharted territory areas that require solutions, then we can put people who have a common interest and a common understanding in a room together to figure out how to tackle those challenges. And that can be done through solutions workshops, building and deploying experimental projects, scenario planning exercises, those aggregated staffing solutions that I mentioned, and or purchasing solutions, and helping inform development or standardization of decision support resources. Next slide. So our focus areas are going to include foundational learning, like primers for senior leaders, basic 5 to 10 minute micro literacy modules that can be deployed to the masses, CCP training for those who will be more hands-on working on climate change, but also in time to be able to begin develop tailored programming. So one of the interesting challenges with climate change is, depending on who you are and where you sit and what you do, your intersection with climate change would be different. So for example, you all are in Pennsylvania and I live in South Florida. Our geographic intersection with climate change is patently different. If you're in local government as a civil engineer, and if I were hypothetically a supply chain professional, our intersections would be patently different. And if one of you worked in transportation and I worked in water, our intersections would be patently different. And so because of that, we need to have foundational and universal competencies and knowledge, but we also need to be able to deploy tailored training that's oriented towards an occupation, that's oriented towards program and project types, and that's also oriented by sector. And that will be part of the vision for deploying training and convening under this academy. We'll look to conduct more research and analysis of practice, to provide staffing resources or facilitate their development, to serve as a community of practice, and to curate resources that will be useful and informative to you. Next slide. So what the Academy represents is an opportunity to look at all of the individual efforts taking place across the state, happening at different rates and scale, and to envision what that whole of Pennsylvania's climate future could look like rather than the sum of the parts. Next slide. And the way we'll do that is that the Academy will serve as a linking force between numerous nodes and networks. There are tons of green space networks in Pennsylvania. There are also tons of networks of local government practitioners, of policymakers, state chapters of professional associations, all of whom may very well have interest areas here and may have developed programming around it. So this academy will link numerous nodes and networks. It will facilitate knowledge exchange, collaboration, and resource sharing. It can serve as a conduit for funding public and public-private partnerships in the future. And hopefully will also drive multi-stakeholder partnerships and those aggregation opportunities I referenced before. Next slide. So earlier in 2021, the Academy established an advisory board member that consists of state agency personnel, local government practitioners, regional planning organizations, private sector leaders, and NGOs working with those organizations. We've got about 30 some people on that advisory board, and that advisory board has begun the process of shaping an initial mission and vision and deploying a strategic plan. In other words, what we're saying is we don't have the time for this to take years to develop. So we've got a vision. ACO's got a ton of experience on this, but let's be candid. We're building this thing while it's in flight, right? So we're going to adapt and evolve, but our initial mission and vision here is support the work of the Pennsylvania Green Gov Council and state agencies by providing important continuing education and executive training to state and local governments, infrastructure organizations, and the private sector, and that we're going to advance the capacity of state and local government agencies, infrastructure organizations, and businesses to develop and implement sound climate change initiatives, thus ensuring current and future public health, security, and economic prosperity. Next slide. So you may ask, okay, well, who's running this thing and how's it being run? ACO is here, ACO is administering, but it's not our academy, right? It's Pennsylvania's academy. So we provide guidance, we're an engine, we administer, but the advisory board and the executive committee ultimately steer this academy. We provide our recommendations, the advisory board provides its recommendations, and the executive committee, which consists of Matt and Mark from the Green Gov Council, Greg Zarnecki from the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, Heidi Kunsch from the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, oh God, my name is my head is blanking. David, oh geez, David, I'm sorry. I'm going to put that out there right now. This is what happens when you spend all your time taking care of ailing parents. Your brain turns into mush. David Althoff from the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. So ACO's role here is staffing, program admin, and we are the pedagogic experts when it comes to climate change training. But let me be very clear about something here. In the long run, we don't want people to have to come to ACO for training. So this academy is also a conduit to a future state where higher ed institutions and community colleges across the Commonwealth will be able to deploy this training. So in time, we also see train the trainer programs, standardization of the curriculum, and being in a position where Penn State and other institutions across the state will be able to carry this forward. Next slide. All right, so let's take a look at what we're actually doing this year and last year and where the academy is going already in the programs that it is initially offering. Next slide. The first of the programs is what we call the Climate Leadership Activator Series. This is a 3-part virtual training series designed to build a foundational understanding of that question: how does climate change affect my organization, its operations, mission, marketplace? It includes presentations from nationally and regionally recognized experts and government officials. We have some brief facilitated exercises and interactive discussions. It's designed really for very senior personnel in state and local government, in business, and maybe program staff who are working in areas that are meaningfully intersecting with climate change, but where those individuals don't have climate change competencies or knowledge. That program will be offered several times per year. The next one actually starts on January 28th as a 3-part series. Next slide. And to give you a sense as to what you would see in that 3-part series, You would see an opening session that talks about climate fundamentals and implications for Pennsylvania and the Mid-Atlantic U.S. Then we would examine what climate implications are on health, equity, and economic vitality in the second session. And then we'd move to how do you go about incorporating this into risk management and enterprise readiness strategies. So that's a quick look at the Pennsylvania Climate Leadership Activator Series. The next offering is the CCP Prep Program, CCP meaning Certified Climate Change Professional Credential. Next slide. So our live online CCP Prep Program helps practitioners who are going to be more hands-on on climate change look at recognizing those climate impacts on an organization's operations, mission, and bottom line. Apply a risk management lens to climate change to help them build the capacity to manage short-term and long-term uncertainty, help them think through tailoring communications to different stakeholders and audiences, to be agents of change, leading and supporting those organizational change imperatives that are so vital here, to understand from a systems thinking perspective their resource consumption and dependencies and where interruptions may take place as a result of climate change as well. To assess the policy landscape and develop action plans, and to collaborate with peers to tackle real-world challenge. So those program features historically are a blend of self-study and live in-person instruction. In a COVID world, it's self-study resources and live online instruction. But all of the interactive elements that you would see in a live in-person class, we still do online. So interactive tabletop exercises are now interactive Zoom breakout room exercises. You'll see case studies, you'll hear insights from fellow CCP professionals, and it is designed, one, for the learning progression, two, also for those of you who would want to become certified climate change professionals, to prepare you for the CCP exams. There are 4 CCP exams. The first exam is on climate science and vulnerability assessment. The second exam is on greenhouse gas, energy, and water management. So you might think of those as being kind of the foundational climate and environmental knowledge. The third exam is on risk, governance, law, and policy, which addresses organizational change, stakeholder engagement, the law and policy landscape, ethics, liability, and professionalism. And the fourth exam is on risk management, materiality, and economic impact assessment. So those third and fourth exams really are the management, leadership, business skills to do something with that foundational environmental and climate literacy. Next slide. This program is about 30 some hours of live training. It's broken into 8 classes that are exam prep, 3 classes that are Pennsylvania specific content that are aligned with the exam prep, but that are not part of the exams. And then a final class to help people think through building their own personal action plan, professional action plan, and getting them ready to submit their applications for recognition as CCPs. So overall, you're talking about a 12-class program over a little bit more than 2 months, running every other week. Since there are 4 exams, the way we structure this is we have a group of classes that prepare you for an exam, and then you get a 12-day break to go study for and take that exam online. And then you come back and you do 2 more classes that prepare you for that exam. And then you get another 12-day break to go study for and take that exam. Because the content is so modular, we don't encourage people to try and take all of the content, the fire hose of information, and then go test on all of it. The first exam content won't help with the fourth exam and vice versa. So the program is structured around the exams as a way for people to get through this in a manageable process and time frame. Generally speaking, I will tell you that 90% of our CCPs will earn their CCP soup to nuts in a 3-month window. So it's a meaningful volume of work, as a professional credential should be, but it's absolutely attainable. So with that, those are the 2 initial programs that are already contracted and dated. There are 4 CCP cohorts currently available, 2 in the winter, 2 in the spring. We run a daytime program and an evening program. The daytime program runs at 11 a.m. Eastern on Mondays and Wednesdays. The evening program runs at 6 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays and Thursdays. All classes are recorded, so if you have to miss a class or 2, no big deal. Just catch the recording on the class portal the next day. You'll also be able to sign up for the spring cohorts. So the winter cohorts will start in a few weeks, and they'll end by the end of March. The spring cohorts will start in April and they'll end by the end of June. We'll then reset and do them again in the summer and then again in the fall. So there will be 8 total cohorts for CCP training available this year. Next slide. In addition to the Climate Leadership Activator and the CCP programs, we are also beginning to deploy more and more webinars on state and local initiatives and resources. You can actually find recordings of some of those webinars already on the paclimateacademy.org website. Those recordings are there for you to learn and understand what state agencies are doing and offering that can be helpful to you. We also have a standalone resource that is a set of links to different programs and resources that you may want to consult from the different state agencies working on climate change. We'll also begin to conduct town halls and collaborative discussion activities and alumni networking activities over the course of this year. And the advisory board has emphatically encouraged us to begin planning for an annual or biannual conference. And in fact, I was asked by PADEP just this week if we thought we could stand one up at the end of the year, as it sounds like there's some traction for that. So I think you'll see that come online as well. Last slide. Next slide. There we go. So keep in touch with us. Definitely bookmark paclimateacademy.org. Go look at the website, look at the upcoming programs, check out the resources that are already there. If you have questions about it, you can submit questions through the website. You can also always communicate with me either through LinkedIn or through my email is on the screen here. And I will also toss that into the chat box for you. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. I'm happy to answer questions and bounce ideas around with all of you. Thanks for sticking around.
Well, thanks so much, Dan, for that wonderful coverage and of the Pennsylvania Climate Leadership Academy. I think it's very informative. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. And